Thank you for joining us at Stoneridge Connect. This session is Does Your Inventory Spark Joy? Aligning Inventory and Fulfillment in Business Central. My name is Dan Schuler. I'm a senior consultant here at Stoneridge. Very excited to walk through this topic with you here today. I'm super into walking through the features and functionality in Business Central and what that functionality can do for businesses and the different types of options that you may have to make your business run smoothly. And there may be some things that I say here today where you're like, yeah, I know that, we're already doing that, or I've already thought of that. And sometimes it can be helpful just to take a step back from the desk for a day and sit in on these and hear someone else say it. And it may give you some thoughts or ideas on ways that you can bring this back to the team and make the team run smooth. And hopefully there's some things that I say here today or walk through some functionality that you weren't aware of, and that'll be great too. So the agenda here today, we're going to walk through warehouse execution alignment and misalignment, cycle count best strategies, bin management, replenishment methods, and pick, pack, ship best practices. And so first, looking at warehouse execution and what causes warehouse misalignment. And I think the first thing that comes to me is just inconsistent processes between the team, lack of documentation, and just users or team members just doing things their own way, right? The day can get chaotic. Things move fast. Things need to be moved. Things need to be done. And sometimes that just requires or results in people doing things without reflecting in the system or doing things that aren't maybe necessarily the right thing to do. And those things result in inconsistency and confusion, especially if it's not communicated across the team. The thing that I hear a lot is, yeah, we can't trust the data. Our data's bad. The inventory isn't matching what I'd see, or I don't expect, there's inventory in places where I wouldn't expect it, or there's blockers where I can't move items. And I would say that in order for you to trust the data, in order for you to fix the data, those processes and that consistency across the team has to be addressed first. Get that under wraps, get the team together and more cohesive, and then worry about the data. And obviously the question then is how do we get the team members to be a more cohesive team? And the two things that I think of is training and motivation. And we've talked about the training, right? Getting processes documented with getting the team motivated. It's about getting them to understand what come from their actions, right? What they're doing in the system affects across the whole company. It's affecting customer relationships. It's affecting finance. It's affecting their team. And especially it's affecting probably themselves, and the things that they do are probably going to have to come back and be corrected and rework on their end at the end of the day. It's about understanding that it's affecting what you do in the warehouse, and it is going to affect the whole company across the board. So I would ask you to just say the words out loud: ERP. E, font size 20, ERP, font size 12. That E stands out as enterprise. It's touching customers, it's touching finance, it's touching planning, it's everything that, and if the numbers in the warehouse don't match what the numbers say in the system, it's going to have to be addressed at some point. So secondly, talking about cycle count best strategies, and admittedly so, I'll be the first one to say that it's not always the easiest to do in the system, especially depending on what your processes are, what your needs are, how you potentially do those counts within the warehouse, making it as efficient as possible. But with cycle count strategies, obviously the first one would be to try to have an inventory freeze of those items at the time that you're doing the count. The system does not handle that well when it comes to doing physical inventory entries in Business Central while inventory is being moved maybe in and out of the system or from bin to bin. And secondly, try to segment your items in an ABC format or a fast moving to low moving format, where your high volume items are being counted more frequently, and then those low counting items or those low moving slower moving items can be counted on a less frequent basis. So I'll show you just a setup here in the system and in a process in a system where the cycle counts can take place if you're not already doing that today. And actually with items or with cycle count setup, I'm going to show you a setup here in the item that surprisingly enough, I don't see as many companies using as you'd think. Maybe some don't think they need it or don't really don't think it would match what they need, and some may just not know it exists. But on the item card within the warehouse fast tab, there's a field called physical inventory counting period. And this is where you can set your count frequency setup. So in this case, I have 3 codes, 1 month, 1 quarter, 1 year, where my faster moving items are going to be counted monthly, and then my slower moving items are going to be counted annually. And then these fields here are going to be updated as I post those counts in the system. They're going to automatically count. And so we'll go through one here today, right now. So I'm going to go to my physical inventory journal. And I'm going to run the calculate counting period. And here's going to be my list of all the items that are available to count in this period. So if I've already counted something, I'm in the future here, I'm looking at May 1st. But if I've already counted something today and it's a monthly or annual, it's not going to show up in this list. It's only going to show items that are still waiting to be counted in this period. So say I wanted to go ahead and count those monthly items again. So I'm going to filter on 1 month, and it's going to tell me this is the last time you counted it, and it is eligible to count again because we are in May. And I'm going to select one of them here. But if I wanted to select both, I could. Actually, I'll select both. Sure. And I'm going to do, I got to enter a document number. And then if I wanted to print this list, so the warehouse user could go in and carry it with him and mark the numbers, you could do that. But I'm not going to print that here today. And then I'm going to go ahead and update some of these lines. And post. Great. So if I were to go back into that item or one of those items that I posted that entry, this one is monthly, like we just said, and it's going to update that last physical inventory counting date to today, May 1st. And then it's going to push out that next counting start date to 6/1. And that's what's driving why it's no longer going to show up on my list if I were to try to go back and count it again. This is always a fun one because there's a lot of different ways to manage bins and set up bins within a location card. But I'm just going to walk through just some of my favorite screens and then walk through a couple setups on the bin, the location card to set up, and why, because I get questions a lot about why did that bin populate or why did that bin show up, and we'll just go through some quick tools here. So going back to our environment, and the first one, I know that a lot of users will find the bin contents from the item card, and that will show you all the bins that one item is in. But you can actually just search for bin contents, and it's going to show you your whole list. And this is maybe an easier view to look at because there's not too many bins, not too many items. But from here, you can start to see that the bin and the item, and then we'll go through default and fixed here. But now you can start to see the quantity on the item, how many are on a pick. So in this case, I have this item, I have 20 in this bin, but I have 10 that are sitting on a pick waiting to be registered. Oops. And then it's going to update that to available to take as 10. So, a common question that I get from users is, what's the difference between default and fixed? And that's where we can go to the location card and remind, I got to find this item. And actually, but before I get into that, another really recommendation that I have regarding bins is sometimes I'll have a company that is trying to create a new location and they'll say, we don't have bins yet, so we'll just have the bin mandatory turned off. And I would definitely recommend, even if you don't have any bins set up for a new location, just to still toggle that on to bin mandatory and just create a default bin. Because once you start getting transactions in the system, you can't toggle that bin mandatory to on. So always recommend that if there's any reason that you think in the future a bin mandatory may be needed, just to have that turned on right away. It's going to make it a whole lot easier for you. But with fixed and default, the difference is that fixed bin is not going to be what you default as the bin that would show up on a purchase order or a sales order, but you're specifying that typically that item is showing up in that bin. And so even if there's nothing in that bin, I still want that bin content to show up. So if I have an item and I have a bin that's set up as the fixed bin, if there's 0, it's still going to show up in my bin context. Whereas default bin, with this default bin selection, I'm saying it's fixed bin. And so whatever bin I have set up as the default, so if I go back to my bin contents in this example right here with this item, I have this bin Y0105 set up as the default bin. And so if I were to go to a purchase order, and even though I have a different bin set up as the fixed, if I go to a purchase order, oops, and I enter that item and in that location, it's going to populate that Y0105. So you have an option. You have an option of setting that up as last bin used or that default bin. And that's one just little heads up there. I get a misconception of what the difference between default and fixed bin is. And hopefully that's helpful for you. So going back to our slide, third one that we're going to talk about here is replenishment methods. The one best practice that I would suggest right out of the gate is understand that with replenishment methods, just because you have it set up as purchase or production, or doesn't mean you can't do the opposite. It's just that's how it's set up within planning. Understand that with the planning worksheet, it's not meant to be an automatic, you can't everything's going to be perfect. That's definitely something that you're going to have to work through over time and massage the data and get it to work to your special requirements. There's going to have to be manual versus automated replenishment approaches. And it's just going to you'll have to balance the two. The other best practice that I have is if you're a production manufacturing company and say you have slower moving items, don't be afraid to turn those items as make to order and then set it with a reasonable lead time. And the reason I say that is that's going to just ensure, especially if it's a very slow moving item, maybe something that you only make 2 or 3 times a year, just to reduce the clutter in the planning. If it keeps showing up and you don't really need to make it, then just setting it up as make to order, that's only going to be something that you'll need to make on demand. And then you can just build it at the time that demand comes. Okay. The other thing that I want to talk about with replenishment methods is stock keeping units. Sometimes there's a confusion or misunderstanding of where to leverage stock keeping units. And you always use the example of Target distribution centers where if stock keeping units exist, it's going to disregard the planning parameters at the item level and now you have different planning requirements. Maybe you need to buy 30 at one location and you don't want to buy any into another location. And so this would allow you to set that up. And then the other thing that you can't do at the item card level, because it's a top high level item setup, but something you can do in the stock keeping units is there's an additional replenishment system at the stock keeping unit called transfer. And so this is a very kind of maybe a niche example, but I always like to show it, which is say you don't want to purchase into the silver location, but you do transfer those goods from your main location into another location. So you can set that up as transfer. And instead of having those manually be created, you can set some rules and planning around getting those transfer orders created to ship it from yellow to silver in this example. So in the silver location, I've set my replenishment system to transfer. I've set my transfer from code to yellow, and then I've set some specific planning parameters with fixed reorder quantity. One other setup needed with this is you do need to set up a transfer route, which is just like your inbound, your in-transit code. If you don't have that set up, it'll fail. But in this case, I have 0 in my silver location, and I had a fixed reorder quantity of when my inventory is below 5. So if I were to run my planning worksheet, and not that one, but I want to calculate my regenerative plan, and I'm just going to run that item in the silver location, and I'm going to click OK. It's going to suggest to me, hey, you should probably transfer 10 over to silver because you're running low. And then this would work the exact same way, which is you get action message and accept that action message. And I'm 3 hours to go through these examples with you. That's just going to have to be something that we talk about another day. So next I wanted to finally touch on pick, pack, and ship best practices. And firstly, there's a lot of different ways to set up your pick, pack, ship in the system, from very basic shipping where you just ship it straight from the order, all the way to creating an inventory pick, posting the pick, creating a warehouse shipment and warehouse pick, all the way to directed pick and put away, where it's very advanced and we can set rules and a lot of different rules in play. And so I'm going to just talk about the one that I see most commonly, or the one that I like using the most, which is always recommend that you are segregating your duties between the warehouse shipment and the warehouse pick, and generating a warehouse pick from that warehouse shipment. It allows you to print all your picks, or this is one example, but printing all your picks, you have an end user that can grab those picks, go pick everything, and then bring it back, and then that can be packed and labeled and posted. But like I said, there's a lot of different ways to go about this, and just got to find the one that works for you based on your warehouse and your warehouse routing. And that was the other thing I was going to say earlier, which is I'm sure most companies have a warehouse map, but setting that up to make that route as efficient as possible when you're picking those items. And we'll go through this within Business Central, but also recommending standardizing your bin setup. And so I'll share my screen here now. We're going to go back to that yellow location. And so here I've turned on require pick and require put away. And then if I look at my bins, I've created a ship bin. And then this is what I was saying. This kind of correlates with bins a little bit, but there's, especially when you get into the directed pick and put, there's a lot of additional setups that I certainly wouldn't recommend that you try, especially if you're struggling with consistency. But setting up maximum and minimum, maximum cubage, maximum weights, bin rankings, that can ensure that if there's a certain bin that shouldn't have so much, you're able to set up those maximums. But again, like I said, if you are struggling with consistency and blockers already, this is more of an advanced setup. Get the basics down first, because if you have this set up right from the beginning, it's going to result in even more blockers, more failures, more frustration. But in this location, if I have that warehouse shipment, require warehouse shipment turned on, I just need to set up that ship bin as my default shipment bin code. And what that means is when I create my pick, it's going to, when I pick it from the main bin, I'm going to be placing it in that shipment bin. So I'm just going to walk through one example here. So I'm going to go over to this sales order and I'm going to create a warehouse shipment here. And I think I already created that warehouse shipment. So I'm just going to go to warehouse shipment. And I'm going to create my pick. And I can print this, I can assign it to a user. And that's something that we haven't really talked about yet that could be a really good way to start to improve the communication and segregation of duties, is starting to leverage those assigned user IDs. I think I may have already created the pick, so I'm just going to open up that pick. And so you can see when that pick is created, it's going to create 6 lines, a take and a place. And within the pick, you may have some scenarios where, or some cases where you don't want to pick from just one bin. I don't know why you would, but there may be some cases where you want to leave some inventory on each bin. And I don't know how many companies do use the split line, maybe a lot, but that's just one good example that I want to show here is if I want to maybe split this out between 2 bins, I'm going to update that quantity handle to 5 and then click split line. And then I can then select a new bin to pick from. And you say I want to pick 4 from this, or sorry, pick 5 from this other bin. So I'm going to update that bin here, and then I'm going to split that line out. And so now I have this split out where I'm picking 5 from multiple bins, and then I can go ahead and register this. And then with just finally around the pick, pack, and ship, it's really important that you're training through the process and not training shortcuts, not emphasizing shortcuts, making sure everything is done consistently across the team. Closing this out, just regarding how to get the team working consistently, cohesively. So I'm a basketball coach, and one thing that I thought about when it comes to, I always like to compare the coaching component to Business Central. And the first one that comes to mind is when teaching passing, you always say on time and on target. Make sure that you're passing the ball and you're locating your man and you're hitting him on time and on target. And it's not just on the passer, right? It's also on the recipient. There has to be a level of trust there. And there has to be a trust that I'm trusting my teammate to make the pass. I'm trusting my teammate to make it on time and on target. And as the passer, I have to trust that the receiver of the ball is going to catch it and is going to do the right thing with it. And if one of those doesn't happen, we're not going to be successful. We're not going to make the shot. We're not going to execute when needed. And I think that falls in line with the warehousing processes within Business Central or using Business Central. And the warehouse user has to trust his colleague and vice versa. Otherwise, there's going to be inconsistency. There's going to be confusion. There's going to be lack of trust. Lack of trust leads to more lack of trust. And it's really about getting everybody on the same page, getting them trained, getting them motivated. And most issues won't occur if they're just done, right? If they're done right, if they're done timely. And then once that occurs, then the data will start to become more consistent and cleaner. And then there's going to be opportunities to become even more efficient as a team. And then customer relationships improve, finance is happy, and it's going to result in everybody being happier. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.